my history books, and when I read the Constitution, I do not see any place in that document that authorizes the President, the Vice President, or any of their administration to wage war without the consent of Congress, to lie to Congress, to lie to the American people, to torture our adversaries, to capture American citizens and deny them habeas corpus. This is not part of the history that I've read. This trip, walking 1,200,000 and some odd steps from Boston, where our revolution began. The Freedom Trail in Boston takes us past all kinds of historical markers of the fights that we had undertaken to protect our way of life. And so we started at Faneuil Hall December 1st. This Faneuil Hall where Sam Adams planned the revolution, where the Boston Tea Party started. The same place where abolitionists met, the same place where anti-Vietnam War organizers met, the same place where suffragettes met, the same place that seems to have been a marker for almost all of the progress we've made in human rights. And it's somewhat a surprise, really, to think that we're now standing here in a spring-like day, enjoying your support, trying to raise the consciousness of others that we know and strangers that pass by. And indeed, our Constitution, the document that we labored over, that defined our powers and the rights and duties of our representatives in the executive branch and the judicial branch. And it's just, to me, we are in danger. It seems to me that the brilliance of the Constitution and the founders was separating powers, adding checks and balances, putting in election cycles, doing all of that to prevent the abuse of power. But it wasn't enough. Even with the separation of powers, even with the checks and balances, even with the staggered election cycles, they put in impeachment because they so feared that the executive would be tempted to abuse his power, much like kings and queens that they were familiar with in the 1700s. We've made it 485 miles. We've demonstrated our commitment to this idea of saving the Constitution, the idea of holding Bush and Cheney accountable. And so in the next couple of weeks, it's my intention to visit with Nancy Pelosi, with John Conyers, and with other congressional representatives to urge them to put impeachment back on the table. But I'd like David Swanson to say a few words.
You're here. You're here.
Thank you all.
Thank you, John. I'm here because I'm inspired by what John has done over the past month or two. And he's talking about silence, and he's talking about Faneuil Hall. You know, those abolitionists had their printing presses destroyed. The movement to end slavery, the public could handle the information conceptually and morally, but they didn't get the information. It was a movement about communications, and that's exactly what this movement is. And you know, a few of these brave citizens here marched from Boston. A bunch of us marched the last teensy bit here, and we marched right past a courthouse where Scooter Libby was convicted. You can see it off to your right. James Madison and George Mason went to Philadelphia and said, we must have impeachment in the Constitution because a president might someday try to pardon a crime that he himself might be involved in. This is what we're looking at. We arrive at a building that's almost unknown outside this city. That's a footnote in the tourist circuit, but ought to be more prominent than the White House and at least as prominent as the Capitol, the National Archives, because this is a nation not ruled by men, but ruled by law. And you look at that Constitution, and it doesn't set up co-equal branches of government. And these people aren't hawking because they love Dick Cheney. The first half of the Constitution is devoted to the single most powerful branch of our government, understood to be so powerful it had to be further subdivided into two branches. The legislative branch of our government, which has every important power, the power to make every law, the power to raise and spend every dime. And the first power given to the House of Representatives in that Constitution, as you read it, you will find, is the power of impeachment. The first power given to the Senate is the power of impeachment. Impeachment is mentioned 6 times in the U.S. Constitution, is developed in more detail than anything else in the U.S. Constitution. This is what was needed to hold in check a possible dictator, a possible new King George. If you don't put impeachment back, you cannot get subpoenas enforced, you cannot get FOIA requests enforced, you cannot get contempt citations delivered. Forget it. You're powerless. You've removed the power of the people through our representatives from the Constitution. There is no more Constitution. Now is the time to act while we can still attempt to do this. I'm honored to be here with John Nirenberg on this occasion, and I hope it inspires the rest of you.
Ray McGovern is in our audience here. I was wondering.
Hey!
Ray! If you wanted to say a word.
Yes.
John, I can't tell you how much I admire what you've done. Martin Luther King Jr., whose celebration we make this month, talks about there comes a time when you have to put your body into it. That's exactly what you've done. That's exactly what a lot of people that I know here have put their body into it. So much evil has accumulated in this town and in this country and in places where we have sent our troops, and that it's hard to know where to start, isn't it? Well, let's start with the supreme international crime. And not only did we invade, attack another country, but we womped up, we forged, we manufactured, we manufactured so-called intelligence to deceive not only our people but our Congress into approving an unnecessary war. So that's number one. There are so many other war crimes that it's hard to elucidate them, but there are other crimes that we know are impeachable. And what are they? Well, in July 1974, a fellow named Richard Nixon made the same mistake as Bush and Cheney. He thought that he could act like a king. And you know what? What the Congress did? Did they jump right in and say, no, you can't do that? No, they didn't. What they did was wait for the rest of us to raise hell. And when it became necessary for Congress to move, they did. And the Judiciary Committee impeached him on 3 counts. One of them was illegal wiretapping. Sound familiar? Has our president done illegal wiretapping? Okay, impeachable offense. Number 2, how about subpoenas? Nixon was indicted, really. One of the articles of impeachment out of the Judiciary Committee was failing to heed or to tell others not to heed subpoenas. And the other one would be, let's say, obstruction of justice. How about that? How about destroying tapes? Tapes, now that sounds familiar. Those of you who are as old as I do remember 17-minute gaps on tapes and so forth. Well, this time they did a real good job. This time they just destroyed all the tapes. So, John, I can't thank you enough for being here as an embodiment of what some of us are doing and what we all need to be doing. What we need to do is to get off our fat rear ends out there and descend upon our congresspeople and our senators and make sure they put an end to this awful nightmare of ours. Thanks for being here, John.